This is season 2 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over the course of our 12-week season, we will knit the pearly pullover together. Hello, my friends, and welcome to season 2, episode 2. We are going to be talking about yarn today, and to that end, the pattern is written for 2 different weights of yarn. I heard from a lot of my friends around the world that they had a hard time finding sport weight yarn, which the original sweater was knit in. Madeline Tosh Pashmina is a sport weight merino cashmere silk blend. It's lovely yarn. It's thinner than DK weight or worsted weight, both of those, and it is thicker than lace weight or fingering weight, also known as sock yarn. So it's a nice weight. I really like this sweater, but I understand that it's not always easy to find. And this seemed like a good pattern. It wasn't too hard to modify so that I could provide all the numbers for both weights of yarn. So for the sample that I'm going to knit along with everybody during the season, I am going to be knitting it in sport weight. I'm going to be knitting it in DK weight. This is Happy Fuzzy Yarns DK Merino in the wonderful bright spring pink peony colorway. I'm very excited to knit this up. It's a lovely squishy yarn, and DK knits up, Reen recommends 5.5 stitches to the inch on a US 6, and I think I'm getting about, if I recall, I'm getting about a 5. Somewhere between 5 and 5.5. I can't say for certain because I have only knit up a flat swatch. I hadn't worked with this yarn before, so I wanted to knit up a swatch really quickly and see how it worked before I started knitting the sweater. It's really nice. I like it. Isn't it pretty? I didn't alternate skeins here, but I think, and I will be doing that for the actual sweater, but I like it. I really like this. It's got this nice dry hand. It's a great yarn. So if you want, check out Happy Fuzzy Yarn. She's got beautiful yarns, beautiful bright colorways, and not just the DK Merino, but this is the DK Merino. So I knit a swatch, right? So like I should be good to go. No. We will, no. We will be talking more about swatches in the next episode as well. But I wanted to check it out, especially as I was writing the pattern, of course. If you are trying to decide which weight of yarn to get, it's really a personal preference. If you want a thinner fabric, then you'll want to try and find a sport weight yarn. And either one, there's nothing wrong with either one. That's why I wrote the pattern in both sizes. So once you've decided your yarn, you're going to need to figure out your needle size. And I've provided information for both weights of yarn throughout the pattern. So we've got our materials list here and how much sport weight or DK weight yarn you'll need. In addition to this number of skeins, I also provided yardage estimates. These are estimates, remember, and especially if you're going to make any changes, if you're going to make the body longer or the sleeves shorter, you will need a different amount of yarn. But this should give you a good idea of information of how much yarn you would need for your size, not just the number of skeins. So then I can see in the pattern that I went down to US 5 for the DK, for the swatch that I did. So just a reminder, if you haven't knit with me before, that I am a loose knitter. It's just knitting. I knit American style or English style, and I tend to knit somewhat loosely. So I usually use a smaller needle size. So if you know that you're a tight knitter, don't start with the needles that I have recommended in the pattern. Go up at least one size, if not 2. If you're a loose knitter, go with what I have here. So I say for a tight knitter, go up 2 sizes. If you are an average knitter, if you find that generally in conventional patterns you get gauge with the suggested needle, I'm impressed, first of all. And then I would split the difference and go just 1 needle size up. So choose your needle. I also want to say about needles that I used a 40-inch circular, which is an extra long circular for everything. I kind of like being able to use the same needle for all the parts. I feel like I get a consistent gauge that way. And I did magic loop for the sleeves. And that's where you make a smaller circumference by pulling out loops of the cable of the needle on each side and make a smaller circumference that way. It's very handy. I really love projects that are like one yarn, one needle, so this is a good way to do that. If that doesn't work for you, no problem. You could do 2 circular needles. A lot of people like to do small circumferences that way, or DPNs. I don't have a problem with DPNs, but I've been knitting for a long time. At the beginning of my knitting career, I did find a little bit of a challenge in not having ladders, just looser spots where I switched from one needle to the next. So that is something to keep in mind when you're deciding what kind of needle to use. And then we're going to be talking more about gauge as we do our gauge swatch next time. But we're looking at 22 stitches over 4 inches and 20 stitches over 4 inches for sport and DK respectively. And that may not seem like a lot, but when you spread that out over 40 inches of sweater, the difference between those two can be significant. So you do want to get gauge. And other thoughts on yarn. So as you know, we use Tosh Pashmina here. It's a really lovely, cashmere silk blend with merino. I'm going to be using a merino, non-superwash merino in the DK weight for my new sample. And I love wool. I'm always going to recommend that you start with wool, especially if you're new to knitting or new to sweater knitting. Go with wool. It's got a little stretch and a little give. It's a great option. If you are more adventurous, you could certainly check out cotton or linen. There are plenty of ways. This is a great canvas of a pattern that you can try out lots of things. Another thing you may want to check out, I have a friend who asked me, what about like a self-striping yarn? So she has a sport weight self-striping yarn. It's like a really thick, like a heavy sock yarn. And I think that would be really cool. The only thing to keep in mind about self-striping is that the stripes are dependent on the circumference. And that's how many stitches it takes to go around in a loop. So the thing to know, and you may love it, is that if you did self-striping yarn, your stripes would be thinner on the body and thicker on the sleeve because of course they are different circumferences. And I think that could be really cool. The other thing to think about is variegated yarn, and that is less, a variegated yarn isn't as reliable as a self-striping yarn in how often it shifts or changes colors. There are a couple of ways you can go about it. You can just go for it and just start knitting and keep going. You might have flashing and pooling. Flashing is when you sort of get zigzags that look like lightning of a color. Pooling is when you have chunks of the color. You may like that. You will, just like with the self-striping yarn, have different kinds of flashing and pooling on the body versus the sleeves and kind of versus the yoke. So that is something to keep in mind. If that kind of stuff really bothers you, then it may not be a great idea to do a variegated yarn. If you like the idea of stripes, you could certainly stripe 2 yarns together. And I have another pattern. I'll talk about striping in another episode, but I have a pattern called the Women's Deckhand, and there's some stuff in there about striping yarns and the best way to do that. So we'll talk about that more in a future episode, but striping yarns is certainly an option and could be a lot of fun. So the other thing to do with variegated yarn, if you love the colors and you want to jumble them all together, the best thing to do, and the same thing to do that what I recommend with just any hand-dyed yarn, is to alternate skeins. Now, in the sample here, I did alternate skeins and I wasn't thinking about it, and I did it on what was then the inside, because as you know, the secret to the pearly pullover is that we don't actually do much purling. We do a lot of knitting and then we wear it inside out. So I alternated the skeins on what was then the inside and twisted them together. And I just have this neat line. It's kind of like a seam. But when I do this one with Reen's Happy Fuzzy yarn, I will be twisting the yarns one over the other on the right side while we're knitting, which will be the wrong side while we're wearing. Because if you look, you can see you cannot tell where we changed here on the right side. So learn from my mistake. It isn't really noticeable too much in the wearing. I don't think about it, but I know it's there. So I highly recommend, if you are going to alternate skeins, to do it on the outside of the work and always twist them the same way. And we can talk about that more when we get into the body. So, but if you alternate skeins, that tends to break up any color changes and mix them together better. So you get a more even, cohesive fabric. So I think that's everything today about the yarn. I hope you're excited. I'm excited. Next time we will cast on a swatch, and we'll talk more about swatching and a few special things that we're going to be doing for this sweater. So just a reminder, if you have questions, be sure to check out the Ravelry forum threads. There's a thread for each episode. Ask your question there. I will get back to you as soon as possible. I check the threads about once a day, but there are also lots of other wonderful, knowledgeable knitters who are in my Ravelry group who often get a chance to answer before I do. So be sure to check there. Check to see if your question has been asked. If it hasn't, ask it, because you are not the only one. You're never the only one with that question. So feel free to ask. In the forums is the best place so we can all share our knowledge, and come back next week where we'll talk about swatching our yarn. Thank you so much for being here, and happy knitting. Mwah. Bye. This is season 2 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over the course of our 12-week season, we will knit the Pearly Pullover together. Many thanks to Reen at Happy Fuzzy Yarns, Corinna at Picnic Knits, Tara Swiger and my fellow Starship captains, and you for being a part of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Don't forget to visit KathleenDames.com/thesweater to sign up for the newsletter before July 22nd to receive your free copy of the Pearly Pullover in your welcome email. Is it after July 22nd? Just not a joiner? Purchase your copy of the Pearly Pullover from my Ravelry shop anytime. Be sure to share your progress on social media with the hashtags Pearly Pullover and KD Sweater. Questions? Comments? Visit the Kathleen Dames Design Ravelry forum today. Thanks so much for joining me, and happy knitting!